I want to answer all of your questions. I want to talk about fitness. I want to talk about ways that we can drastically improve the lives of individuals on the autism spectrum through fitness. So if there's any point where anything is unclear, if you want me to elaborate on a particular topic that I'm talking about, then just let me know, and we'll leave some time for questions at the end. I will say that I can't solve any individual issues right now in terms of, well, what exercises should we do at home, because that is a very specific question, and I'll get into our process. A little background on me. So I've been running Autism Fitness for a little over 18 years now. The certification level 1 just celebrated its 3rd anniversary. We had a big call for that. And we have, I believe, 342 Autism Fitness certified pros in level 1 around the world right now. So I'll give you a little bit about my background. So as Manisha mentioned, and this is really exciting for me also to know, my background, I started in personal training and general fitness. And the strength of that, I think, is I really, my background is really understanding exercise science and movement and being able to program safely and effectively for most populations. I had the opportunity, again, 18 years ago, to start working with teenagers on the autism spectrum in a fitness capacity. And at the time, I started undergoing intensive training in applied behavior analysis and ABA protocols. So the entire foundation of the autism fitness methodology that I'll get into, we call it the PAC profile, was grounded in best practices from the fitness side and from the applied behavior analysis and special education side. I think that the biggest advantage that we have in autism fitness is that we are not starting out with an expertise in autism and then saying, okay, well, what does exercise look like? I am fortunate enough to be friends and colleagues and have been educated by some of the absolute best minds in the fitness industry. And I can tell you, as someone who's representing the fitness industry, David has a long and storied history in the fitness industry as well. There is a very, very big difference among different professionals in the fitness industry, particularly in the United States, because there's really not a standard licensing or curriculum. So you have people who, after a day or two of getting a certificate on an online program, are now a personal trainer. And at the same time, you have someone who is a personal trainer, but they've been working at a very high level for a decade. I'm fortunate in that I did get to study under and am, again, friends and colleagues with some of the best in the industry, because that's what our athletes on the autism spectrum deserve, is the absolute best training protocols. What we're doing now with Autism Fitness, we call it our movement for movement. And what that really is leading towards is creating a high level of standard and practice for delivering fitness and adapted physical education programs for this population. And the last thing I'll say before I get into some of my slides is that our legacy that we want to leave with Autism Fitness and to continue on is that fitness and adapted fitness, adapted physical education programs for this population are accessible and that they are provided at the highest level of practice possible. So that's what we're here to do. And we're also here to educate. The last thing that I will say on this is the one misconception that people have about my work or about Autism Fitness is they'll share a post on Facebook or on Instagram, or they'll write something really nice about Autism Fitness, and they'll say Eric Chessen and Autism Fitness are doing great work with kids on the autism spectrum. Most of my practice throughout my almost 20 years has been with teenagers and young adults. I've worked with children as young as 5, and my oldest athlete was 56. And so this is not something that is just, I think people are so used to programs and facilities and services being just for this ages 5 to 12. And when we're looking at fitness, we're looking at it as a life skill. If it's a life skill, then it's something that we have to consider long-term. That being said, let me get into my program. I'm going to share my screen with you here. So I'm going to present from right here. And again, if anybody has any questions, just type them in. Here we go, loading. There we go. So while we're here, I'm going to go over this kind of quickly because I get it that you're all here, and this is a fantastic turnout. You're all here because you want to learn more about fitness for this particular population, but I like grounding things in very specific, particular ways, because then we can talk about it and elaborate it and find out why this is actually meaningful. The reason this presentation is called The Missing Key is fitness is probably the most overlooked and misunderstood area of development. We were having a short chat before we started the webinar about some of the misconceptions in fitness and what fitness actually is and what exercises make sense, not just for the autism population, but for all populations. So that's a really important conversation to have. I can't tell you how many families or schools that I've wound up consulting with have contacted me and said, hey, we've started a fitness program for our students with autism, and we bought a treadmill, or we're using this piece of equipment, and they really don't like it. So then we have to deconstruct and rebuild the idea of what fitness actually is and what makes for a good fitness program. Fitness has short and long-term benefits. So there are some immediate benefits to physical activity, whether we're talking about biochemical and increasing serotonin, decreasing cortisol in the autism population. There have been some good studies recently published about lowering maladaptive or non-compliant or problematic behavior through more vigorous physical activity. And there's definitely some points to that need to be spoken on further. But the overall point is that fitness has the same benefits, if not more, for the autism population as it does for the general population. So we have these proactive and reactive qualities, meaning that there are preventative qualities to fitness. Right now we have, and I just received an article about this in my inbox the other day, about a need for pediatricians to really monitor and have some type of protocol for individuals on the autism population who are gaining weight or who are already overweight. And as much as this is a nutrition issue, it's a physical activity issue as well. And I've been approached by parents, and I've worked with athletes who were overweight. The proactive side of fitness is, how do we prevent this from happening so that we can optimize skills now, and then later when we talk about 3 or 5 or 10 years away, we don't have to worry about those medical issues. I think that this population has enough challenges as it is, that there's no reason to add medical complications that are completely preventable, like absolutely preventable. But that comes from recognizing that fitness programs have to be implemented. They have to be run. We have to have a very high level of practice in this. Otherwise, we're just talking about it. Because if I asked a room full of 50 or 100 people, how many of you think fitness is important? I think 99% of those people would raise their hands. And then if I said, well, how many of you think fitness is important for the autism population? 99% would raise their hands, probably because it sounds good. But how many of you all are implementing it? Not too many hands go up. And that doesn't stem from people not wanting to do it, but or being even motivated to do it. It's the how. And what we do is provide the how. So we have these reactive benefits as well. So a lot of the movement and motor deficits that are very common to the autism population, we can address these in good fitness programming. And finally, I mentioned this, we want to create a high standard. This is what we're doing through Autism Fitness, creating a high standard and recognition of best practices. All right, so I'm going to go to my next slide. What fitness is. Now, I have limited time here to go over this, but again, I want to create a foundation for you so we can talk further at some point. When we're talking about fitness, it is such a general term that it really takes a great amount of understanding and considering, what do we mean by this word fitness? What do we mean by physical activity? Because if you walk into a large, like a large gym now, and you see cardio machines all over the place, and then you see weightlifting machines, and then you see free weights, and then it can be overwhelming, particularly if you've never had any experience with a fitness program before. And even if you have, now we take into account all of the challenges that we have in autism, and I'll get into these and how we break it down. It can be daunting to try to put together a program that works and makes sense, and that's if we're motivated. A lot of our athletes, particularly, the athletes that I've worked with over the past almost 20 years, most of them did not start out as motivated. So the two myths that I like to dispel early are, number one, that this work is only for young people, which it's certainly not. And two, that we're only working with those and providing fitness programs for those who have a high level of motivation. And I can tell you that is absolutely not the case with the athletes I've worked with, and undoubtedly it's not the case with our certified pros and the athletes that they work with also. And I'll break down how we address that as well. So we want to focus on these major physical skill sets whenever we're developing a program: strength, stability, and motor planning. All movement, all healthy motor patterns are going to come from these three foundations of movement. This, being strong enough to perform an activity, having enough stability to perform that activity, and having the motor planning or sequencing. And when we talk about motor planning, we're talking about being able to go from movement A to movement B to movement C efficiently and safely as well. We want programs to be individualized to meet what the current ability level is. And it's not to say that the exercises, here's the really neat thing, the exercises remain constant among all different individuals. So you see this young man in the top picture here, he's performing an overhead walk with that sandbag. Down there, we have one of our certified pros who's also a parent to a 14-year-old teaching his son how to squat. His son is 14. We're not looking at things as taking 100 different exercises and trying to apply them. We have something we call the Autism Fitness 15, which are 15 essential exercises, and then we're deciding at what level of difficulty or challenge makes sense for for any particular athlete at any particular time, which is why it is so critical that we assess in the beginning. All right? We want exercise should be progressive in nature. It's why for most of us now in adulthood, if we go up or down a flight of stairs, we don't get sore the next day because we've already adapted to that challenge. So what we want exercise to do over time is become more challenging in accordance with that skill development for that particular individual. What we're really out to achieve with exercise programs, it's all about generalization. And that's why we talk about the most effective exercises for this population or for any population, because they don't differ that much. We want the skills that we develop in the gym, in the home, in the clinic, in school, whatever that setting is for running those fitness programs for our athletes. The real benefit is later on if they're able to carry those skills over to areas of daily living, right? So that's the reason we do a lot of our squatting activities and a lot of our pressing activities and a lot of our pulling activities and a lot of our carrying activities, because we know that these big strength movements and stability exercises are going to be the ones that are truly going to enhance quality of life, and enhance quality of life by giving our athletes the skills that they need to be independent. And finally here, providing an enjoyable and functional activity selection. This is particularly important right now because, here in the US as well, a lot of states and a lot of families are still quarantined. So to have something functional to do apart from being on an iPad or being in front of a screen or just sitting around, once our athletes begin to enjoy aspects of programming or the whole fitness experience itself, we have found a new, to put it bluntly, thing for them to do, activity for them to choose, something that is reinforcing or enjoyable for them that is not part of a sedentary daily existence. All right. So this is our approach. And again, if anybody has questions, you can post them in the chat right now, and then I'll save some time at the end as well. So this is our approach, and I developed the PAC profile because I realized there are assessments that are run by physical therapists or by occupational therapists. There are assessments that are run by other personal trainers that have a lot of validity. The issue is when we talk about the autism population, there are some things that if we do not consider them, our program will not work. So the PAC profile, this stands for physical, adaptive, and cognitive functioning. And this is all as it relates to physical activity and movement. So the PAC profile is a proprietary methodology that I developed and that has been validated by our certified pros, because they're using this on a daily basis with their athletes, and they're addressing these three levels or these three areas of ability with all of their athletes. And I'll get into exactly how we do this. All right. I have a question. Children with ASD have SI difficulties. Will that come in the way? Dipti, what do you mean by SI? Get back to me on that, and I will definitely get you an answer. So I'll wait for that to come in. Another important thing, this is not about high versus low functioning. And I think we all have a working knowledge of what that means, high versus low functioning. Oh, sensory integration? Yeah, absolutely. And one further point to that, when we talk about sensory integration, it's going to pertain to each individual, and it's also going to be based in what that particular exercise is and how they experience it also. And thank you for pointing that out. And I'm very familiar with the term sensory integration. I just didn't recognize it as SI right there. Yeah, even then, that's on an individual basis as well. So if I'm doing an intake and a new athlete, the parent writes down, or the caretaker writes down sensory integration issues, I'll say, all right, well, what does that mean for us right now? So that's on an individual basis, and we can talk about that. Yeah, vestibular dysfunction can definitely get in the way of movement, especially when we're talking about motor planning as well. All right. How is this program different than OT, as both work on strength, stability, and motor planning? I'll get into that a little bit later. Allow me to get into the program first. And OT can mean a lot of different, when I say personal training or fitness programming, that can mean a lot of different things too. As far as the major difference between this program and occupational therapy, I hope there's a lot of overlap, as there should be. And that's why we have so many occupational therapists who come through the Autism Fitness certification. Occupational therapy tends to deal a lot with fine motor skills. Here we're working on a lot more gross motor skills and building in the fine motor as well. So let me go through the program here, and then I can answer any questions about similarities or differences, right? So where I left off was being about not being about high functioning versus low functioning, because this doesn't give us an accurate picture of what this individual needs right now. Okay, so PAC stands for physical, adaptive, and cognitive abilities. And if you don't have an answer for one of these, then the program is going to be lacking something. Right? And we need to address each one of these skills in our programming. Now, I will say also, the PAC profile approach, even though I developed it for fitness protocols, can be used for anything. We can use this for hygiene skills like hand washing. We can use it for showering skills. We can use it for any task-based curriculum, because I designed it specifically for fitness and movement protocols. That's what we use it for. But each one of these is absolutely critical when we're talking about developing a program, because we have to know these things in order to run our program successfully, and in order for it to make sense for that particular individual. So we need to address each one of those skills as it relates not just to exercise as a whole, but to each exercise. So we have to, I love asking questions, particularly around what can an athlete do right now, because that's going to lead me to the answers that is going to enable them to be successful. All right. So physical skills, and I'll answer all of these questions a little bit later on. I really want to cover this stuff right now. Physical skills, what we're asking is, at what level of progression or regression, so at what level of elevating the challenge or lessening the challenge, can the athlete successfully complete this particular exercise? Because an exercise is only as good as it is being coached and practiced, right? So we can say, oh, the athlete is doing X movement, they're doing an overhead press, but what does it look like? How does it function, and how is it truly benefiting that particular individual, right? And in terms of our exercise selection, this is why we come back to our Autism Fitness 15. We want to enhance fundamental skills, right? The strength, stability, and motor planning in specific planes of movement. And I mentioned a few of those already. We have our pushing, pulling, carrying, squatting, crawling, and I'll get into the importance of each of these. And our main goal is to develop abilities that are going to generalize or carry over to activities of daily living, both in the short term and in the long term. So that's what we're looking at in terms of physical skills. And there's a lot more to that, right? Adaptive skills. How motivated is the athlete to perform this specific exercise? So if someone says to me, oh, my son or my daughter hates to exercise, I don't even know how to respond to that because my first question is, all right, well, what have you tried? Because your definition of exercise might be a little bit different from my definition of exercise and the programming as we run it in Autism Fitness. And we also want to get into specifically which exercise. So we have athletes who love, and I think Manisha can attest to this, Akhil will love just about anything that has to do with a band. So if we start him off with band rows or band pull downs, he's probably going to be pretty into that because it involves that particular piece of equipment or that movement pattern. He may not as much enjoy, I don't know, an overhead press or a medicine ball scoop throw, simply because right now it's just not very reinforcing for him. So that level of motivation, even though we can assess it generally, it's a lot more valuable to us to assess exercise by exercise. Higher motivation is going to lead to increased participation. And before you even ask the question, well, what happens if you have an athlete who doesn't want to do anything at all? We can start there too. That's why we always have to get a baseline. So that's something that we cover in the certification level 1, is what happens when we have a very low level of adaptive functioning or motivation across the board. We can still work with it, because if you think about the general theme and goal of what we are trying to do, it's to make fitness accessible to all individuals on the autism spectrum, not just the ones who start out with a high level of motivation. Right. So what we use is pairing. So we're taking that new or novel activity, the one that they don't like so much, or the one that might be just kind of they might be anxious about it, and we pair it with something that's reinforcing. So we have this equation that we're working out, and this is not always a completely linear process. But what we'll do is we'll create a contingency for our athletes and say, all right, first you can do 2 push throws, and then you can have the band, or then you can have a break for 30 seconds. And the more consistent we are with these practices, the more that exercise actually begins to take on reinforcing qualities. And we've proven this again and again and again and again. Right? What we want to do initially is limit or decrease the amount of anxiety. As we know, among the autism population, there tends to be a very high level of anxiety. And the root of any anxious behavior or any anxiety is not knowing what is coming next. So we always want to provide our athletes with enough information in the moment so that they can stay on task. So we want to know, okay, first this is happening, and then this is happening. First, 5 overhead throws with the medicine ball, and then you can take a break, or then you can pick what activity we want to do next. So we have these strategies in place for our athletes of all ages and ability levels. And the way that the strategy is going to be implemented is going to depend on that particular individual. But we're looking at using these very universal concepts. And I know people have started asking already, if we look at physical, adaptive, and cognitive functioning, this is not just specific to the autism population. It's very important that we use best practices when we're working with the autism population. But even if you think about a neurotypical individual who is going to the gym or working with a personal trainer for the first time, it would make a lot of sense for that personal trainer or that coach to know, hey, what is this individual's current level of physical ability with this movement pattern or with this exercise? What is their current level of motivation? Do they love this exercise? Do they really not love this exercise right now? And then we'll get into cognitive functioning next. So the key takeaway here is the less we overwhelm and elevate the anxiety for our athletes, the more we're actually going to get done, right? Cognitive, again, something, if I just said high functioning versus low functioning, we all have a general idea of what that means, but how do I put that into play when I'm designing and then implementing a fitness program? Cognitive comes down to how is this athlete best going to learn this particular exercise? What type of coaching, what type of prompting am I going to be using? So we're asking, how do we use language and cueing to best teach this exercise for the athlete? I will say, excuse me, overwhelmingly, most of what we focus on when I'm doing training and development or when I'm leading the certification is teaching people and teaching professionals to limit the amount of verbal cues that they are giving, because people tend to overtalk and undercoach. If there's too much language coming towards an athlete, they are going to get overwhelmed. And again, this is not just the autism population. If I'm standing there with a barbell on my back and I have a coach giving me 3 paragraphs on what I need to do, I'm going to lose focus. So what we need to figure out as coaches and as instructors or anybody who's facilitating this program is how much language is necessary, and how much and where we need to start cutting the amount of verbal information. Question here, when you say model prompt, is that you demonstrating the exercise them? 100% yes. So a model prompt is, if I'm teaching one of my athletes an overhead press, we are always modeling the exercise for our athletes first, because we want them to see how it should be performed. And then we build our specific coaching and cueing around that. For some of our athletes, they're going to respond perfectly well to a model prompt, which is great, because then I never have to physically prompt them for that exercise. I can just do this with my hands over my head and they can follow along. All right. So cognitive is all about discovering at what level of instruction or cueing this athlete will be successful with this particular exercise. All right. So the way we look at this is the most intensive prompt that we can possibly give is a physical prompt, where we are actually using our hands to guide the athlete through the movement. We don't want to do that a lot, because of course we want our athletes to be as independent as possible with each exercise, but because of some of the common strength and motor deficits inherent to autism, sometimes we have to get in there and prompt hand over hand, or prompt from the elbows, or support an athlete standing up when they're performing a few of the different exercises that we use, like a band row, because they're losing stability. When we can fade that, we're in a really good place. So an athlete might be starting to get that skill down, so we can fade our prompt, go to a model prompt, and eventually the goal is always independent mastery of that skill. So I want to discuss really quickly, before we go into some of our programming strategies, general fitness versus sports-based programs, because I've had a history of parents and family members asking, oh, what sport should my son or daughter be involved in? Our curriculum is entirely gross motor and exercise based, because it's general, and we know that these are the skills that will most likely carry over into activities of daily living. Now, I will say also that if an individual is playing a sport or is engaged in something recreational, like hiking or bike riding or swimming, general strength, stability, and motor planning will help to enhance that. But it does not work the other way around. So there are some important key points here about general fitness versus sports-based. Now, particularly in the United States, we place a lot of emphasis on team sports and competitive sports. And something that I like bringing up about, about culture, or about the things that we consider important, just because you have a cultural consideration or even a cultural obsession with sports does not make it the optimal strategy or the optimal activity for every participant, and especially when we're looking long term. So in the States here, if we're talking about baseball or football or basketball or any other sport, it's not that it's bad. It's let's look at that from the long term and consider that most children who play or participate in that sport activity are only going to play for a few years at most, even recreationally. So what are we setting up long term for everybody in turn, with respect to general fitness, if we know that after a few years they're going to stop playing this one sport anyway? And I can go on and on about this, and I'm happy to, but I'd like to get you some better information right now. So general fitness programs focus on general fitness, on gross motor skills, fundamental movement patterns, and they can be individualized even within groups. So when we're talking about hurdle steps, for example, which are one of our warm-up exercises that we do with nearly all of our athletes, we can have 2 or 3 athletes lined up in a row, and we can have hurdle steps that are different heights. So rather than say we have one level of activity for 3 different levels of ability, we can have one activity with 3 levels of progression or regression, depending on who's in front of us. If we're doing it this way, everybody participating actually benefits from that. That is not always the case with sports programs. We can easily progress or regress these exercises as needed. There are more opportunities to succeed, because if we're thinking about what we call in America soccer, or what the rest of the world knows as football, there aren't a lot of opportunities to handle the ball or kick it also. So there's a lot of waiting or lag time as well. And I'm not discounting running up and down the field, but that skill development, our athletes don't have a lot of opportunity to engage in that. Whereas a general fitness program, we can have 3 or 4 athletes, if we're doing a group or a class session, we can have them go through the same movement pattern, the same exercise 6, 7, 8, 10 times in a row, so that they actually develop the skill, because we need them to practice over and over until they get it. So consistency is definitely our friend. With general fitness programs, we have less bottlenecks or waiting time. And from a cognitive perspective, rules and competition and the speed of gameplay can often be overwhelming for our athletes on the autism spectrum. We don't need to include any of that in our programs, right? These are completely arbitrary, and it's a complete choice of whether or not we want to include the idea of winning and losing, or scoring a point, or defending against a point. It really does not make a significant difference in our program if we're looking at developing the fundamental movement, strength, and stability skills. The movements that are inherent to sports-based programs have less generalization or carryover to activities of daily living, and it's difficult in most group situations to provide individualized progressions or regressions. There are, as I mentioned, less opportunities for skill development during gameplay. So you have that chaos of gameplay where a lot of our athletes on the autism spectrum will get lost, or they'll stop, or they'll get distracted. And that higher periods of waiting time also. If I only have 45 minutes or an hour each week to work with one of my athletes, my hierarchy is much different than if I have 4 times or 5 times a week, and I really want to get those fundamental skills taught so that it can enhance their quality of life. All right. So, common obstacles to fitness programming: unsure of where to begin, lack of available programs and professionals. This is what we're trying to do through the certification. Adaptive and motivational issues. What happens if, my son, my daughter, they won't do this. They hate it. They ran away. Every time I bring out the resistance band or the medicine ball, they are in the other room, not having any of it. And also finding the time, although that seems to be globally less an issue right now. And then this point about socialization. We can definitely build social skills into a fitness program, it's not going to happen automatically for a lot of our athletes, but it's a skill set that we can include. Some people seem to be having audio issues as well, and I see a couple in the chat. I'm not.
Please continue. I think it is the network issue at their end.
Okay.
So we'll try.
Got it.
Thank you.
Got it. All right. So I'll continue, and maybe in the replay that'll work as well. So this idea of, if we have our son or daughter on a team, that's not going to automatically create social skills, but it's something, and this is the reason why we have so many people of different backgrounds and different fields of practice coming into the Autism Fitness certification, because we do have ABA therapists or speech pathologists or special educators whose focus is a lot of the time on socialization, but we can develop social skills through fitness programming at the same time addressing the physical needs of our athletes. And I know I didn't point this out just yet, so I keep referring to our participants as athletes. So our definition of an athlete in Autism Fitness is a little more universal. I think that if you are engaging in vigorous physical activity on a regular basis and you're getting better at it and it's consistent, to us, you're an athlete. So I refer to all the individuals with whom I've worked in the past, all of the individuals with whom I work in the present, all of the individuals that I'll work with in the future as athletes. And that's something that all of our certified pros have taken on also. So when we get together on a Zoom call, we talk about our athletes because that's who they are. So we can target individual social skill goals and practice them in general fitness settings as well. So fitness programs 101. So this is how we structure all of our programming, whether we're talking about an individual or a group. It all depends on the number of exercises that we're going to be using in our program. And the exercises, again, are going to be universal. There's no such thing as an autism-specific exercise. We are all human beings. We're all talking about human movement, even when we're talking about profound movement deficits. So in the past, in addition to working with individuals who do have an autism diagnosis, I've also worked with individuals who have Down syndrome or who have cerebral palsy or who have any number of developmental disabilities or delays. An individual with cerebral palsy is going to have some different physiological needs than an individual who has autism and simply has some delayed movement issues and some strength deficits. But the good thing is I'm still looking at the same basic motor pattern. So I want to get the arm up overhead. I want to teach them some type of squatting position. The exercises remain constant because we're looking at human performance, which makes things, at least from the programming side of things, pretty easy because we don't need to draw from 100 different exercises. In fact, I think that's a great mistake to do so because it doesn't give our athletes enough practice with each movement pattern. So we have 4 sections of programming. We have our warm-up and mobility section, which is getting the whole body mobile and ready for more challenging activity. We have dynamic movement, which is coordination, motor planning, and stability, a little faster pace, depending on what faster paced is going to mean for that athlete. This is where we do a lot of our medicine ball work, a lot of our rope swings. Third is, and this is the most important area of our programs, strength and stability, where we're looking at developing stronger general movement patterns, healthy posture, and greater activity of daily living capabilities. So this is where we have our squats, our presses, our pulls, and our heavy carries as well. And finally, we have our section of games and preferred activities. So we do, if we want to build in some type of competitive element to it, we can do that. I do a lot of what we call quasi-competitive activities where there's a goal. For example, our favorite one is called cone carnage, where our athletes take a medicine ball and they're throwing it at You can see some of the cones in the background here. They're knocking over the cones. There's an offensive component to that activity where they're knocking over cones and there's a goal, there's something to achieve, but there's no defensive component to it. So there's nobody blocking the cones. There's nobody obscuring their view from it. So they're able to do it as they can progress along. And even something like cone carnage, we can progress or regress. We can make it more challenging or more simplified depending on the athlete or the athletes involved. And this is the most important part of progressions and regression. The most important part of physical programming are progressions and regressions. And that means the level at which we create a more challenging activity or we simplify it. So you can see in the picture above, and then I'll get to this question about ADL activities. This band row that young Dylan is doing in the top picture, I'm supporting his upper back with my hand. So that's an example of a physical prompt. And here in this picture on the bottom right, I have Andrew, who is independent with that standing band row. So I can just step back and coach him from afar. When I'm talking about activities of daily living, any physical task that individual has to perform throughout the day, whether it be going up or down a flight of stairs, we're talking about gait pattern or how well they're able to walk or ambulate, talking about carrying groceries or doing laundry, talking about sitting down and then standing back up. Any big gross motor pattern, we want to enhance through fitness abilities. Now, just because someone can do something does not mean that they are doing it optimally. And that's when that's where we can also go back and talk about the preventative aspects of physical fitness, where we have a very high rate of adults, particularly in the West, who have low back pain. And a lot of that is from problematic squatting patterns. So if we can strengthen an individual's squatting pattern now in their adolescence or teenage or young adult years, maybe we don't have to worry about low back pain when they're in their late 30s, early 40s, or even in their 50s also. So which activities can we use for warm up? I'll go through some of these in a little bit because of the amount of time that we have. I may have to rush, but these are all the things that we cover. We cover these regularly in our newsletter on Autism Fitness. These are all the things that we go through in the certification. At the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the Autism Fitness Toolbox, which we're very excited to be relaunching quite soon. And these are things that we cover quite regularly. And like, what do we build into a program? So then we have something called criteria for baseline mastery. This means that the exercise can be performed independently. When it can be performed independently, there's a high likelihood that it will generalize to activities of daily living. And that regression is a simplified variation of an exercise so that the athlete can develop the proper mechanics and performance around that exercise. Is there an age limit? No, I've worked with athletes as young as 5. I say 6 years old and younger. We're spending a lot more time on developing motor planning skills than we are on strength skills. But the programming that I do for a 7-year-old versus a 27-year-old looks pretty similar because we're focusing on the same movement patterns. It may not be the same amount of weight, and this is why we have to look at it individually as well. Yes. I will clarify, the PAC profile works for just about any population because we're looking at physical ability as it relates to the exercise, adaptive ability as it relates to motivation, and cognitive ability as it relates to them learning that exercise. So this can be employed or used with anyone. So I'm going to go through, and I apologize because of the amount of time that we have, not rushing, but covering these exercises. So our warm-up and mobility phase, these are the exercises and the movement patterns that are going to provide the greatest benefit for our athletes. So hurdle steps. And I'll play this video so we have some examples of it.
Nice steps. And back the other way. Nice steps.
All right. So what? So I give a what, a why. Why are we doing these hurdle steps? We're increasing hip flexibility. We're working on motor and gait patterning. How? You just saw it. So we want those hurdles placed at an appropriate distance for each individual. And we want those knees to track over the hurdle during the step. We go into all these exercises in a lot of depth during our certification. Regression. Now, every athlete is going to be a little bit different with their current level of ability. So we're not going to give an athlete hurdle steps that are too high for them if they're not yet at that, because we're going to see compensatory movement. And this is where having good information about programming becomes absolutely critical. So our regressions, we can always lower the hurdles. We can always use fewer hurdles, and we always want to demonstrate it for our athletes as well. The progressions that we're using, we can use higher or taller hurdles. We can use more hurdles. We'll go to about 6 or 8 hurdles at most. And we can start incorporating lateral steps or different movement patterns. Our rule is always, always, always that we're not going to start progressing an exercise until the athlete has mastered it. So the time consideration is really based on that particular individual. What I mean by that is we are not changing our program every 6 to 8 weeks just because it's been 6 to 8 weeks. We're looking at individual mastery of that exercise, and that can take 6 weeks. It can take 6 months. I've had athletes who it takes a year for them to develop the motor skills or the strength or the stability in order to perform an exercise independently. And that's fine, but we have to recognize that our athlete is where they are at right now, and we have to program for that, not program for what we'd like to happen, right? So it's not that we're using only these exercises because I don't know any others. I've been in the fitness world for 25 years. I know a lot of different exercises. The key to being a good coach or instructor is being able to filter and say, just because an exercise looks good, or just because it's novel, or just because it's a different variation, that doesn't mean that it's appropriate for our athlete. And this is universal. This is whether we're talking about someone on the autism spectrum or otherwise, which makes us have to be really careful and diligent about our programming, because it's not about, ooh, how many different exercises can we show on YouTube or on Facebook? It's, I'll have an athlete do hurdle steps and squats and heavy carries all day because I know those are the exercises that are going to most benefit them. So this is not about who can be most creative. It's about who can be most consistent, right? It's not a race. One of our other go-to warm-up exercise, overhead band walks, great for thoracic or upper back mobility and shoulder health as well. So let's take a look at the overhead. This is a overhead band press first. So there's that press and pull, and that's going to activate the musculature of the upper back and spine. Really important if we have athletes who are doing a lot of sitting during the day. So there's Coach Rebecca providing a little bit of a prompt there. And there's that grip strength too. Someone had asked a question about occupational therapy and the difference between this program. It depends what the OT is doing, but we incorporate a lot of grip strength into our autism fitness programs as well. All right. So regressions, we can use a mirror prompt, a physical prompt from the elbow. Progressions are band presses and then an overhead walk. With our warm-up activities, we're not using a lot of progressions because they're just used for warm-up. We want to get to more of our challenging, more strength-based activities. Cone touches, one of our favorites. So cone touches, we have locomotion, which is gait patterning, ambulation, getting from point A to point B. And we also have hip mobility. The athlete is bending to touch the cones, right? So we get this great motor planning activity where they are walking and bending at the same time. And there's a coordination aspect to it also because they're touching the cone.
Cone touch. Good cone touch, man. One more. Yes. Good cone touches.
Okay. So we're placing the cones laterally across the room, and we want to use cones that are appropriate for the height and hip mobility of each athlete. So some of our taller athletes are going to need higher cones because they can't they can't bend as low without going into spinal flexion, which we want to avoid. Someone had asked me to share the previous slide. I can make the these will be available as well if someone wants a particular slide. If they could contact Manisha and let her know, and they can get in contact with me about it also. You can also email me. I'll put my email in the chat later on if you want any of the particular slides for this. All right, regressions for this. Regressions and progressions should be simple. There shouldn't be a lot of thought process in them. So fewer cones or higher cones to make that bending challenge a little bit easier, at least for the time being. Progressions, we can use more cones, lower cones. We can use an object to touch the cone as well. And there are some really cool things that we can do with medicine ball throws once the athlete has reached criteria for baseline mastery, meaning they can, like Chris, who's in the video here, he is able to perform this exercise independently. So we can start adding or progressing this activity for him. Crawling patterns, super important. Shoulder stability, hip flexibility, and trunk stability. Question for an older adult like the one doing the cone touches, what's the goal, and have they come to a level where they don't need specific fitness exercises? No, we always need fitness. We never stop moving for the most part. If we're not going to stop moving, then there's no point at which, I don't think anyway, in my professional opinion, there's no point in which we say, okay, I don't need fitness anymore. I've achieved that. Because what also happens is if we're not moving, those skills don't continue to remain. We see a decrease in strength, stability, and motor planning if we're not continuing to practice. It's like anything else, right? Absolutely. And I'll get to some more of these questions. I think by the end we'll have time for a few questions, and then we can talk about how we can further the conversation here. Crawling patterns, again, immensely important for developing trunk stability, shoulder stability, and hip flexibility as well. Yeah. Oh, wow. Perfect hand placement. All right. And then we get into, and now these are not all the exercises that we use. I'm giving you a sampling right now, but I mentioned in our programming protocol, we have our 4 phases. So when we get into phase 2, this is our dynamic movement. So we're doing a lot of, oops, just missed a slide. We're doing a lot of medicine ball work. So these are our push and overhead throws. We always use soft medicine balls. We're never using the hard rubber ones because we don't want any head or hand injuries. Why isn't this working? There we go. So here are our medicine ball push throws and overhead throws. And as this is going on, as you're watching it, why we're developing trunk stability, upper body power, coordination, trunk stability, reactive skills. And we're also teaching rooting, which is very important, being able to keep our feet on the floor because all movement starts from the feet. And that is going to have an impact on trunk stability as well. Our regressions for this: shorter distance, providing a physical prompt, and easy to progress this, we're just increasing the distance between the 2 participants. So here, another dynamic movement. These are our sandbell slams. So the sandbell is a disc-like object filled with sand. Very safe, very effective, really great amount of exercises that we can use for this. We can use it for presses, we can use it for grip work and slams as well. Great exercise for getting out frustration. So we use this in our dynamic movement phase, usually after our medicine ball throws. Oops. So again, we're looking at rooting, we're looking at trunk stability, we're looking at grip, especially on this, and we're also looking at that shoulder mobility as well. So when we get into strength exercises, and again, these are just a sampling of our Autism Fitness 15 that we use. So the overhead press is going to enhance upper body strength. There's also grip, shoulder stability, trunk stability, and rooting as well. And it's teaching control of a movement pattern. So here we have a mirror prompt. So Coach Rebecca there is demonstrating how to do the press for our athlete. And he's able to follow along here. So he doesn't even need a physical prompt. And I believe that is an 8-pound, so about a 4-kilo sandbell there. All right. And we want to enhance both pressing and pulling skills. So we have the press overhead with the sandbell. We have a pull down with the resistance band. So I'm going to demonstrate that for you. And I know I'm going a little bit quickly here, but I want to leave plenty of room for questions later on. All right. So we have our programming is, I won't say done for you, but all of the programming is already there in terms of nobody has to invent any exercises. When we talk about the Autism Fitness 15 and our programming protocols, they are all there already. These are exercises and programming practices that have a long history of practice and validation within strength and conditioning, within general populations, within athletic populations. It's just time now that we brought the same thing that has been successful for the neurotypical population into the special needs and autism population sphere. When we talk about adaptive functioning is going to be the one that is most critical for those of us working with the autism population. Because when you have a neurotypical person who's motivated to go to the gym, motivated to hire a trainer, motivated to engage in a fitness program, that is not a point of contention. However, we oftentimes don't have that luxury with the autism population. So exercise may not be immediately reinforcing, and we can't force fun. So I will never drag, physically or otherwise, an athlete through a program. So we have to figure out ways to improve their adaptive skills and improve their motivation. So we have to find an inroad to this athlete enjoying some aspect of this program. So a couple things that we can do, these are some of our go-to strategies. Again, I'm giving you an overview right now, and in our, whether you're consulting with us or going through the certification level 1, we spend a lot of time going over these concepts and practices. We always want to offer choice. So we'll have 2 different exercises. I don't mind which one we do first or which one an athlete wants to do first. So I'll ask them questions. And if we think about the amount of choice that many of our individuals on the autism spectrum have during the course of their day, it may not be much. So I will ask them, do you want to do push throws first or overhead throws first? All right. So I'm setting up the structure in a way that they know they're going to be doing one of these 2 throws. However, they get to pick which one they want to do first. We want to start at a point of physical success, meaning we don't want to guess where they're at with a particular exercise. That's why we're doing our assessment at the beginning, so we know what their baseline skill is. What can they do right now? And that's the level at which I'm going to coach this exercise right now. So if they can only do 3 hurdle steps in a row right now before form starts breaking down, then we're just going to do 3 hurdle steps for a little while until they've shown mastery for that. And we want to give them access to preferred activities. And this is all contingency based. It's all if then. So if you do 5 push throws, then you can have a break, or then you can do, sometimes our athletes get really into one particular exercise. So then you can play with the band, or then you can do band pull downs. So it becomes this contingency of, if you do this exercise, then you can do this other exercise that you like doing also. So it's just trading one exercise for another exercise, right? And counting can have a lot of anxiety reduction quality. So if we think of anxiety, the root of anxiety being not knowing what's happening next, and I tell an athlete, you have 8 reps of band pull downs. If I'm counting for them, or if they're counting along also, and they know, okay, I'm on repetition 4 now, I can remind them, oh, you have 4 more reps and then you can take a break. You have 4 more band pull downs and then you can take a break, right? So it gives us a way to reduce or neutralize anxiety, because it reminds the athlete, number 1, what they're doing right now, and 2, what's happening immediately after they complete it, right? Effective coaching and cueing, doing more with saying less. So we're using this most to least prompting. All this means is some of our athletes are going to start out with a particular exercise needing that physical prompt, and eventually we want to fade it back so that we're just demonstrating how to do the exercise, and then eventually they master it independently. This process can take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks to a few years. But my perspective on it is, I would rather have an athlete master an exercise over the course of 2 or 3 years than never master it at all. Because once they do that, once they master it, it's a life skill. Now we're going to keep teaching it, but we can progress it from there also. We want to label the name of the exercise. So if we have, whether we have a verbal or a nonverbal athlete, they also understand what we're asking for. So pick up the medicine ball, you've got 10 push throws. Eventually they understand what those words mean, and the power of those words to influence what they're going to do next. And we cover this a lot in our trainings, using less verbal instruction and more demonstration and more just labeling. So you see in the upper right hand corner that label, demo, do, and cue is one of our mantras that I get our certified pros to repeat over and over again, because that is the process towards effective coaching. So when we're trying this at home, and part of this has been our Autism Fitness Try This at Home program that I teach for parents and caregivers, You can start with just 1 to 2 exercises for a few minutes each day. So our protocol for this is short and often. So you don't need to start out the first day doing 45 minutes or an hour of physical fitness. We can onboard or introduce our athletes to this slowly by just giving 1 or 2 exercises at a time. And we can choose 1 from each category. 1 warm-up exercise, 1 dynamic mobility exercise, 1 strength exercise, and end with a preferred exercise. So what we're doing is we're building their physical capability while at the same time increasing their adaptive skills, or their, initially their tolerance of physical activity. And over time, it might be to the point where they start enjoying certain aspects of it as well. All right. So programming, a few programming options. And again, this is something that I can put together and send out. So we can start with hurdle steps, overhead band walks, walking band pulse, which I didn't get into here, and cone touches. Choose 1 to 3 exercises, 2 to 4 sets of each. Then we have our push throws, overhead throws, sandbell slams. If you look us up on Facebook on Autism Fitness, we put a lot, or YouTube, we go into a lot of these exercises in depth and give tutorials on these as well. All right. Key programming points and continuation. Short duration but often approach, especially when an individual, it's their first time with fitness, it's your first time coaching, right? We're providing behavior-specific praise and preferred activities. Behavior-specific praise is not just telling our athletes, oh, great job, but great job doing this exercise, because it also teaches the name of that particular exercise, and then finding the appropriate progression or regression, because if the exercise is progressed at too high a level, the athlete is not going to get anything out of that exercise. Well, what's going to happen is they're going to start, even if they're motivated, they're going to start physically compensating, and they are going to derive no benefit from performing that exercise if it's too challenging for them. It's the same way if you had somebody who could press 20 pounds overhead, and then you gave them a 40 kilo weight. You said, here, press this overhead, and they can't, and they're getting it halfway up. They're not benefiting from that at all, because it's beyond their current level of ability. So a couple ways, and we'll talk about the Autism Fitness Toolbox that we're launching soon, which is one of our online programs. The certification level 1, the next course starts July 2nd. The way that we're doing the certification now is it's a blended learning course, and we do 9 sessions on Zoom. Actually, it'll be part of, because our next session beginning July 2nd starts at 9:30 a.m. For me, so it's your evening. We did that for a lot of our international attendees, and it's 9 hour-and-a-half long sessions online, and then when travel and gathering becomes safe again, we're planning the rest of our 2020 and 2021 in-person schedule. So it's 9 online sessions through Zoom, and then 1 full day live practical that we're going to be setting up regionally in the United States, and then at select locations internationally. So I'm going to, and again, I'll put together some of these slides for everybody, and I'll send that over to Manisha. I'll get that done over the weekend. So any questions? I know that there were a few in the chat. Now keep in mind that I can't, because I'm not assessing your athletes right now, I can't give specific protocols for specific athletes, because I haven't assessed them. I haven't seen them. It's something that we can do if we do a Zoom coaching call and I have a little bit more information, but I can answer questions in general about some of the concepts and practices. So I'm going to open this up to anybody on the board, or Manisha or Jasmeet, if anybody else has any questions or anything's been relayed to you, go ahead and ask away.
Anyone want to ask any questions, they can unmute themselves and ask if any question left
So Vikash has a question that if
Yes.
there's any kind of a warm-up activity for a high-functioning autistic kid that you would start with.
Yeah, the same thing again, and I don't know if you missed the earlier slide, but when we're talking about high functioning versus low functioning, that doesn't give us enough information because it's related to that particular exercise. So to give you an example, I've had plenty of my athletes who are nonverbal, and from a cognitive perspective, if we were to give them a standard intelligence test or some type of cognitive test, they would score very low, but they are very competent with with cone touches. And then I can have an athlete who is very high functioning. I can have an entire conversation with them throughout the session, but they need a regressed version of that cone touch because physiologically, with their physical ability, they are not demonstrating that they have that skill set down yet. So we're not, that's why we break it down into physical, adaptive, and cognitive, because just because someone is, quote, high functioning from a cognitive perspective, that doesn't mean that that they're going to be able to do an exercise better than someone who is lower functioning from a cognitive perspective. For example, case in point, there are plenty of people who are smarter than I am, but I can probably squat or deadlift or press more than they can. So we have to take it not only on an individual by individual basis, but also at what level can they do this exercise? Because again, the physical, adaptive, and cognitive skills are going to vary tremendously from individual to individual. So we have to figure out what can they do right now. So where do we start this exercise for them? The exercises are the easiest part because those are going to remain the same. If you said, okay, I have a high functioning teenager and a low functioning teenager, I'm going to say, great, they're both doing hurdle steps, they're both doing cone touches, they're both doing push throws, but it just depends at what level. Here's a question. Can physical fitness program be followed virtually, seeing the present situation due to COVID? Yes, they can. The biggest factor there is if I'm coaching someone virtually, the facilitator, whether that's a parent or caregiver, that person and myself, we have to be on the same page as far as our coaching and cueing, because if there are two different pieces of information being thrown or said to that athlete, they're going to get overwhelmed and it's not going to go well. So one of the things that I offer is, first of all, I suggest anybody who's delivering a fitness curriculum go through the certification, but barring that, it needs to be parent or caregiver training first, because if two people have a different way of coaching or implementing the program, it's going to be a mess. But yes, we can do, and some of our coaches are doing virtual training. In fact, tomorrow evening for our certified pros, we're doing a closed Zoom call on optimizing Zoom and distance fitness programming.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Many times, many times we have seen in India that children are advised to go, that take this child for swimming or it will reduce his hyperactivity, or take this child for skating and it will help him. So to advise in this kind of a way that you go into this activity and that activity, instead of that, we don't know whether the child likes it, child doesn't like it. So instead of that, this program would work much better, and then these skills could be developed and seen, and then you could advise. Would that be better?
They work synergistically. So for example, so what we're focused on is the general strength, stability, motor planning, and movement. But for example, I was working with one young man who was a swimmer also. What we were doing in our general program with squats and medicine ball throws, and he even got to the point where he was doing push-ups and pull-ups. He was really doing great. The strength that he was developing in our general program carried over to his swimming as well. So I think the key takeaway here is the general skills will almost always carry over to the swimming or the bike. I just spoke with a parent the other day whose son I worked with for years, and she said the other day he just in the backyard picked up a bicycle and spontaneously started to ride it. But she said, you know what? Even though the bicycle skills are very specific, if he didn't have the trunk and postural stability that we developed in our fitness program, he probably wouldn't have been able to do it efficiently. So what we're doing is really training for life, regardless of whether or not that individual is also going to participate in swimming or yoga or biking. And I encourage them to do it also, get as much physical experience as possible. Swim, hike, ride a bicycle. But the foundation, the core of this is really the general fitness programming, because it's going to enhance everything else.
So one of the parent has a question. How do you
Yeah.
use them with breathing patterns? Is it
breathing patterns are difficult. It's not something that we work on immediately, but it also depends on, I always have a hierarchy of things that I'm focusing on. Breathing work I've found to be useful in a few cases for calming anxiety also. So we teach nose breathing, nose breathing in and then mouth breathing out. During the actual exercise, that can be something that's a big challenge for us to teach. I like teaching it kind of on the side in between the exercises when I can do it, as in through the nose, out through the mouth, and it serves pretty well as a calming behavior too, if an individual is demonstrating an elevated level of anxiety.
Thank you, Eric. Do you have any assessment criteria for PAC?
Oh yeah, the PAC profile is an assessment itself. So what we do, a typical PAC profile assessment, and we have videos of assessments in the Autism Fitness toolbox. What we're looking at is we take an athlete through as many of the exercises as we can get through in a session, and we are looking at what is their physical aptitude with this exercise. At what level can they be successful with it? Adaptive functioning. I've had plenty of athletes who they walk in the room and they're ready to go and they just follow whatever directions I give them, and fantastic. And I have some who, they walk in the room and they start crying and they have a meltdown. And it doesn't mean that we're going to stop programming. It means, okay, we have to take a very specific protocol for them. And it's not as though, okay, now you get to go home and never do fitness again. It's if we don't have a high level of adaptive functioning, then we have to work with that early on. And again, we have very specific strategies that we've proven over time are very effective. And I have plenty of this on video as well. But the idea with the assessment is figuring out, at least in this moment right now, what is the athlete's ability to perform a push throw or a hurdle step or a squat or a press? What is their level of compliance or cooperation or motivation to participate in this particular exercise? And then how best do they understand it? And once I have a baseline for those three, then my coaching and my strategies and my programming become a lot more effective and a lot more, or a lot less difficult for me, because I kind of have an idea of where I need to go from the point that we're at right now.
If there is a child with a limb discrepancy, how can you assess the fitness activities?
I would have to see it. I would have to see it exercise by exercise, because it could mean. And so, for example, with some of the athletes that I've worked with who have cerebral palsy, so there's one arm that's always in flexion here, and there's one that has, let's say, 70 degrees range of motion. So I'm going to take that into account. I have to with their programming and individualize it as best as I can. So I will say, without a specific protocol, because everybody is going to be different, in that case, I'm going to pay a lot more attention to doing individual limb movements, because if I don't have the same range of motion on my right arm that I do on my left, that is something that I absolutely have to address in the fitness programming.
So Poonam, she's a special educator. She's asking, do you see often that a child who has stimming will have reduced stimming once they start the fitness program?
Oh yeah, totally. And it depends what what the basis of the stimming or stereotypy is. Most of what we know about stimming or stereotypy is that it's self-regulation. So it's something that is derived from the neuromuscular system, and it's a way to for the athlete to get, or the individual to reach, homeostasis, or they're anxious, or they're under or overstimulated. So my answer to that is, if we can do something that's more functional, like I see very little stereotypy when our athletes are actively engaged in a program. So there's less time for them to engage in hand flapping or spinning around when they're stepping over hurdles or catching a medicine ball or doing sandbell slams. So the vigorous physical activity is oftentimes a replacement for those behaviors. I don't have enough information to say that we're seeing reduced levels of stereotypy when that individual is sedentary outside of the fitness session, but during the fitness session, we do see a markedly reduced amount of stereotypical behavior.
So Eric, do you give a guidance into what should be the number of days in a week that we should do, and how many months should we do the protocol and see the difference with the child?
I would say once a week is the bare minimum that we should be running programs, especially if we're in home. You can run programs 7 days a week, especially if it's 3, 5, 6 minutes at a time, a couple times a day. No problem whatsoever. Because of a lot of the movement and strength deficits that we see in this population, the more practice they can have with the exercises, the better outcome we're going to have. As far as long-term, again, this is a life skill. So I look at it, I pose the same question. Well, for how long in our lifetime should we be washing our hands or brushing our teeth or eating, right? And the answer should probably be, forever, until we're at the end of our lives. So I look at the same thing with fitness. For how many years should we be enhancing our physical abilities? As many years as we have on this planet. So I look at it again as a life skill. So to me, it's in the same conversation as anything else that's going to prepare us for our best possible living experience.
So there's a question from Sonia. Her daughter is 8 years old and she's very scared of getting inside the swimming pool. Any strategies to build on her interest and motivation level?
Yeah, and this is, again, something that would be highly individualized, and we'd have to, there are 2 or 3 protocols that I could think of immediately that we would try. Not knowing the whole story, and again, it's very difficult for me to advise based on a small amount of information and not having a good amount of history about this. One of the things that seems to be very helpful is having a social narrative or a social story with just pictures and words about that activity. And it's so funny that, and this, I had no plan in doing this. I've had this book for years and it sits on my desk, and it's all about like charts and graphs and educational educational materials that were used historically. I just keep this on my bookshelf, and it's so funny how it comes around. What's that?
Can you just lift it up?
Oh yeah.
It's an Indian version.
Yeah, it's an Indian chart from India.
Wow.
I've had this for like 15 years, and I love it because it shows how effective learning through pictures can be. Also, I just literally looked at that on my bookshelf. So I said, oh yeah, social narratives. Because and I don't know where the fear is stemming from regarding getting into the pool, but a social narrative, it gives somebody information about, okay, here's here's the pool, and we're going to go to the pool, and you can stick your toe into the pool, and then you can sit on your towel. So we can have limited exposure over time to reduce the amount of anxiety that comes up when she's, getting into the water. Now, figuring out what exactly about getting into the pool is so scary that we'd have to dig a little bit deeper, and unfortunately we don't have time for that. But there are definitely a few protocols that I think if one's not effective, the other might very well be.
So there's another one issue that we have in India. We stay in apartments, and our apartments are small. So how comfortable this program would be to do it in our own apartment?
Oh yeah, totally. I've worked in some when I was back in New York, some of the spaces that I was working in, particularly when I was working in people's homes, were really tiny. So when it was warm out, which in New York is maybe 4 months out of the year, we could work outside. When it wasn't warm out, then we were working inside. And I've worked in spaces that were very confined, but we were still able to run the program effectively, because you work in the space that you have, and we can modify anything so that we can get the best possible situation out of it. And that, even with the equipment that we use, from the sand bells to the medicine balls to the cones, I like using stuff that takes up very little space, so you can take it and just put it in a corner and not have to worry about, putting a full machine or jungle gym in the middle of your living room that you don't even have the space for, because neither do I. And
these are all stackable, so it becomes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I keep most of my equipment right now. I keep in the trunk of my car. I mean, it's not a lot of stuff, but it's effective, and it comes down to the exercise selection that you have, and just figuring out what is going to be the most most effective.
And how? What do you recommend? How early should we start?
I'd say there are things that we can start at about I've had people contact me about individuals who are 3 years old, 4 years old. And I love that, because it's an early start. With those children, we go into a lot more motor planning activities. But even then, we can do stuff like cone touches. We can do, take this beanbag and put it into the blue circle. We can work on colors and numbers and positions, and really give them a head start. Because again, the majority of athletes that I've worked with are in their late teens, early 20s. So I'm already seeing a lot of the movement deficits and the strength deficits that they have from not having moved for 17, 18, 22 years.
Correct. Any exercises that you could suggest to improve back posture?
Virtually everything that we've shown today in the strength phase. So the band pull downs, the standing band rows, and especially heavy carries as well. And those are 3 staple movements in our strength curriculum as well. So, again, anytime we're talking about posture, anytime we're talking about trunk stability, it's not just one exercise. It's not even just 2 exercises that are going to enhance it. It's the entirety of the program. But specifically when we're talking about a posture, we're talking about the upper back, and we're talking about trunk stability also. So the heavy carries and the overhead band walks that we were doing also. Now, it's not to say just do those and we're magically going to enhance postural control, but those are things that I would focus on if we were developing a protocol that was specifically for an individual who was having a lot of posture issues.
Last question.
Yep.
Can you suggest some strategies to calm down a child with autism when there is a meltdown, a sensory overload?
Again, it very much depends on that individual, and we have to assess that also. What's happening prior to the meltdown? What does the meltdown look like? Is it happening in one particular environment? Is it happening with one particular person or one particular instructor? Is it happening at a certain time of day? There are so many questions that we have to ask around this, and they're all great questions. That the key is understanding what else is happening around this, because I could give 4 or 5 different protocols for that, but I'd rather have more information on it and be able to give, give an answer that's really going to be helpful, rather than give a general statement about it.
Correct. During your program, Eric, do you see children often getting a meltdown?
In the beginning, yeah. That'll happen once or twice, usually in the first couple of sessions, because you have to consider that there's going to be a really high rate of really high level of anxiety the first time an athlete comes to me and is working with me or doing these exercises for the first time, because they don't know what the expectation is. So if I am providing structure early on and saying, okay, well, you're crying or this behavior is happening, I say, all right, well, we'll start with this, but it comes down to really respecting our athletes and saying, okay, our athlete is upset right now for whatever reason. And sure, I want to know what that reason is. More often than not, that athlete is upset because they're doing something that they don't want to be doing. So in that case, well, my goal is to have them doing something that they actually want to be doing. But that respect also comes with reciprocity. So then so that process looks like, all right, well, let's try this. Here, just grab the band or grab the ball, hand it back to me. And we already have some level of success right there because they've done something that I've asked them to do. So I do see meltdown behavior. We do see tantrum behavior. Most of the time it's in the first session or two, and then the athlete learns the contingency of, oh, I come in, I touch the cones, and then I can have a break. Or I come in, I touch the cones, and then I can do push throws, and they get it. We have to consider that these are human beings with their own thoughts, feelings, abilities, and learning about those individually is going to take a little bit of more work on our part. But I say, all right, you're melting down right now, but I'm looking 3 sessions, 4 sessions, 4 months from now and saying, well, that's probably not going to be the case after we work together for a while. Not because I have a magic wand, but I have these strategies and concepts that I'm able to implement effectively.
Thank you, Eric. There's just one question left.
Yeah.
And this is possibly from my side. Other than the children getting fitter, in terms of their body profile, body structure, the fitness program, what are the overall development that you see in the children? Do you see language acquisition? Do you see better motor planning, better body control?
Yeah. With respect to language development, when people are moving, when they are engaged, and we see this in infants also, when infants start speaking or start babbling, there's movement that accompanies it. So there's good evidence that when we are engaged in an activity and more focused, that we are better prepared to learn and also better prepared to use language effectively. So one of the things that we work on, not immediately, and it depends on the individual, but in our Autism Fitness programs, is using as many words as possible, not us as coaches, but our athletes, using as many words as possible, and also labeling and identifying. So I'll have an athlete who will say sandbells because they want to use sandbells. I'll say, okay, great. Which sandbell? And they'll point. I'll say, tell me which one. Do you want to use blue or green? And they'll say green. So we're building this narrative and we're building this language around it. Again, that's individual, but ultimately what I'll say about it is I look at, from a coaching perspective, I want my athlete at their best. At their best means not only from a physical functioning standpoint, but I want the best speech production. I want the best behavior. I want the best version of them. And the only way to do that is to hold them accountable and have an expectation of, if you're going to ask me to go to the bathroom, you can ask me to go to the bathroom, but you're not going to say bathroom. You're going to say, I need the bathroom. Okay, great. My expectation is that they are going to perform to the best level that they can. So speech, especially with things like prepositions, so in, on, under, left, right, colors, counting, these are all speech targets that we can build into the fitness curriculum. It just depends on that particular individual.
Okay. Thank you so much, Eric. It's been a wonderful session with you, and we look forward to much more sessions with you, and we're looking forward to having you here in India very soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we end, I request everyone to on their video so that Eric can virtually meet everyone. And if anybody want to comment on today's presentation, they want to talk something about today's talk, they're welcome.
Also, Eric, before you leave, I want to ask you to tell something about the toolbox, what exactly it is. And as I said, our foundation members, we would like to offer it for 3 months for free. And I'm just waiting for a final confirmation from my board. But also what to expect. It is extremely important for a, nothing is magic, unfortunately, in autism. And miracles do happen unless you are extremely lucky. But even for miracles, they say you have to work very, very hard. So if you could make those expectations clear, that what to expect, even a small good eye contact or even a behavior coming down, even for that day, even for that moment, is an improvement. So if you could just make that clear, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it's great that you asked that, because even when I'm talking about my own my own one-to-one programs, and this, me being the founder of this, I only promise people 2 things. Thing number 1 is that this athlete, this individual is going to move better, that we are going to develop strength, stability, and motor planning. And thing number 2 is that we're going to find some aspect of this that they enjoy. I can't necessarily put a timeline on that, but I've seen over, I would say, 2 months, so about 8 weeks of consistent program, there is a big increase in physical, adaptive, and cognitive skills. Now, there are going to be some exercises that are going to take, as I said, months and months to reach independent mastery, but you'll find 2 or 3, maybe even 4 exercises that the athlete is really getting good at and really seems to enjoy. And that's going to benefit them both in the short term and in the long term as well. So the promise that I make to people about the program is that if you are implementing the protocols the way that they are meant to be implemented, and if you are consistent with it, you are going to see improvement in physical performance. And you may very well be, this is not a promise, but you may very well be surprised at how much they actually like this programming. And we're talking about the same individuals who, parents write about, oh, they hate to move and they hate exercise, because we're doing it a different way. We're doing it with different exercises, and we're doing it in a way that really is built around them and their skill set, rather than taking this very, it has to be one particular protocol type of way. So it's a protocol that's open to progression or regression depending on that individual. So the Autism Fitness Toolbox, we're relaunching it. I've been working on the new version for the past 2 years. In the downtime that I've had with the COVID situation, which is not much because we're constantly working on something, but we've completely redesigned the program and the way that it's delivered. So the Autism Fitness Toolbox is a subscription program that gives you access to the PAC profile assessment, to our video library, to all of our programming protocols. And we are going to continuously update the video library with exclusive tutorials about the concepts, about coaching, and with actual videos of not only my Autism Fitness athletes, but the athletes of our certified pros, so that everybody can see what it looks like when this athlete does a standing band row versus this athlete doing a standing band row. And then we're also going to introduce another level to the toolbox called PAC Plus, where premium members can have access to a closed Zoom session with me 4 times a year to talk specifically about their questions and their athletes, et cetera. So we're really excited with this program because we've been working on it for 2 years. So we're going to make the formal announcement. We're finishing it up this week. So we're probably going to do the official launch at the end of next week. And then, as I mentioned, our level 1 certification, the next one we have coming up, that's going to run 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks, because it's 9 sessions, starts July 2nd. And we have a course syllabus that the best way, honestly, to get in contact with us, apart from social media, is to subscribe to the Autism Fitness newsletter, because everyone on that newsletter, in addition to getting 2 other free downloads, one about the PAC profile and one specifically for parents, you get all of the most up-to-date information about what's coming out on the certification. You can download our course syllabus there as well.
I had one question.
Yeah.
Yeah. During this general fitness program that you conduct, is there a time when you are able to take a group and, where these individuals play within a group, or you create a game where they could play and they cooperate with you? Or is it always the instructor along with the child or the adolescent or the adult that you're doing this program for?
In terms of the live programs or anything that I'm doing virtually or through Zoom right now?
No, in terms of your whole program, you mentioned that you have like a program which has 15, you have built up some 15 exercises you take up, right? But when you are doing with one child, there comes a point when they have mastered it. And then do you also progress to a form of game with another child where 2 children are playing together?
Yeah, we absolutely do that. And then if you, in fact, I think it's on our Facebook right now. One of our most popular games that we play is called Cone Carnage, where our athletes are knocking down the cones with a ball. A lot of that is going to depend on the group that we have also. Now, because of my I guess my niche and what I'm trying to do, most of our time is spent doing the fitness programming, because when we talk about achieving independent mastery of these exercises, and this happens, it's funny when people ask about, well, what happens after they master it? I will tell you, it's going to be a long time for most athletes on the autism spectrum before they have independent mastery of most of these skills. When we talk about crawling patterns, or even when we're talking about pressing a sandbell overhead, if we're talking about a 2 kilogram sandbell, it's great and it's an achievement, but that's not a lot of weight. So I'd say that the majority of work that I'm doing is always going to be on the general fitness side, but there are games that we can build in later on. I'm very specific with my protocols and my programming, because I have certain things that I have to account for and I have to take care of. So if I have an individual, for example, whose squatting pattern needs a lot of work, I'm not going to say, okay, well, let's put the squatting pattern on the side for now and focus on games and activities. If there's someone else who says, oh, I really want to focus on games and activities and recreational, I'll say, great, you can do that, but how are we developing the squatting pattern, if that's really important? So I think it comes down to, as a professional, I know what my scope of practice is. It's not to say that we can't introduce different games and different activities, but I'm not going to do it to substitute for the stuff that I know is really important.
So I want to add here, to answer the question, we have tried the social skills. We have a social skills program, and before COVID, we have run a very good successful fitness program, and where we have implemented a few of your activities and exercises and with the typical children. So in the group, it has successfully, kids have enjoyed, even the neurotypical kids as well as the individuals with autism. So they have played together. We had some good success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's all about, you can, as long as you know how to progress it and regress it, like a neurotypical individual can do a bear crawl, and even then you still have to assess, to what level they can do it. So there are all these questions that need answering before we put into effect our protocols. And, once people, the really good, and there have been some great questions here, but once people start putting into practice, and this Manisha. Once you start putting into practice, you realize, oh, okay, now I have a different set of questions because I understand what's actually going on here.
With that, in fact, I could then started seeing his locomotion, how he's just putting his leg up and how he's moving. So
Yeah.
yes, you're right. They're different set of questions.
Uh-huh. But that just comes with practice.
Absolutely. So that's an end to our wonderful webinar. And we thank Eric, Jason, and David for being here with us. Thank you, Manisha, for making sure this happens for us in India. And once again, see you guys on 1st of July. Take care. Have a good night. And Eric and David, you have a wonderful day ahead. Manisha, you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everybody.
All right.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you.